Hey, this is Joe Cook with Georgia River Network, and the title of this program is Four Things You Need to Know About the Oconee River, even if, well, maybe you don't really need to know them. But here goes. Let's start in Athens at Cedar Shoals, the birthplace of Athens. It was there in 1801 that Daniel Easley played host to John Millage, Abram Baldwin, George Walton, John Twiggs, and Hugh Lawson, who were on a mission to find a location for a state college. Easley showed them his land spreading on either side of the river, and by the time the meeting ended, the state delegates had agreed to purchase 633 acres of his property. Easley's demonstration of the hydropower potential of the river and a meal of shad caught from the base of Easley's dam might have played a part in sealing the deal. As it was, the delegates were very impressed with the prospects of the river and the landscape, and especially the shad. They felt young people could grow strong and healthy and smart eating those shad caught from the river. Well, in the 1950s, legendary Atlanta newspaperman Ralph McGill laid the blame of the university's struggle to produce a winning football campaign at the feet of a diminished shad fishery on the Oconee. Why was it diminished, you ask? Well, that's because the dams went up on the Oconee, blocking the shad's traditional migratory route all the way up to Athens. McGill wrote, "The Founding Fathers dreamed of students eating the Oconee shad and developing the most magnificent brains and muscle to be found in any of the nation's academic centers. The shad didn't disappear all at once. There were enough to produce Bob Toombs, Alex Stevens, Ben Hill, Crawford Long, and others who were the first division of the Cerebral League. But the shad slowly petered out, and the dream of the Founding Fathers was eroded away. Today, only the more valiant of catfish swim the Oconee." He suggested that in order to restore Georgia's gridiron dominance, the legislature needed to enact measures to restore the shad fishery. Moving downriver, let's go to Milledgeville, where sandbars tell the story of the river. Walk the length of one, you'll know what animals have visited, from four-wheeler tracks to heron prints, and you'll know what was eaten, from mussel shells to turtle eggs. Well, on the sandbars immediately below Milledgeville are an inordinate amount of beverage can tops, most dating back to the 1960s and 70s, and in them is a true American story, one of triumph, tragedy, and good old American know-how. Until the early 1960s, most beer and soft drinks consumed in the U.S. were drunk from bottles. But when Ermel Fraz, a tool and die maker from Dayton, Ohio, found himself at a picnic without a can opener to pop his beer, he set out to make a better drink can. The result was the Pop Top beer can. It was the first introduced by Iron City Beer in 1962. Iron City's sales jumped 233%, and soon the big beer makers followed suit. In 1969, canned beer outsold bottled beer for the first time. But soon, those Pop Tops became a solid waste nightmare. They inspired a line in Jimmy Buffett's Margaritaville and became a symbol of American excess, careless waste, and litter. People called for a change, and Fraz and the beverage industry responded, introducing stay tabs in the mid-1970s. As one newspaper quipped, "Environmentalists won't have the pull tab to kick around anymore." Fraz, who grew up on an Indiana farm and started his Dayton Reliable Tool and Manufacturing Company in 1949 with an $800 loan from his wife, became a wealthy man thanks to the pull tab. In 1980, the company reported revenue of $50 million and had a payroll of 500 employees. Our next story comes from the Interstate 20 bridge over the Oconee on the upper end of Lake Oconee. This particular stretch of the highway is named in honor of Carl Sanders, an Augusta native who served as Georgia's governor from 1963 to 1967. Sanders was a backup quarterback at the University of Georgia. He piloted a B-17 bomber in World War II and practiced law before being elected to the Georgia General Assembly for the first time in 1954. His Democratic primary election in 1962 was historic because it was the first time the party's candidate for governor was elected by popular vote rather than through the county unit system, an archaic electoral system in which the top vote getter in each of Georgia's counties received one vote. Though a segregationist, he was also pragmatic, and as governor, he notably refrained from segregationist rhetoric and complied with federal efforts to desegregate the South. After he was elected governor, his University of Georgia football coach, Wallace Butts, quipped of his old second stringer, If I had known he was going to be elected governor, I would have found a better place for him on the bench. Our final story comes from Cooper's Landing, a bluff along the river in Lawrence County. Here, along the riverbank, was a boat landing and what was called Hall's Warehouse, both identified in an 1890 U.S. Corps of Engineers river survey. The survey identified at least 25 boat landings between the mouth of the Oconee and Milledgeville, a distance of nearly 150 miles. From the early 1800s, these landings linked the land to the river, the Georgia coast, and European markets for the natural resources and farm products of the region. The first known trip made down the Oconee and Altamaha to Darien was recorded in 1801, a pole boat that descended from Milledgeville to Darien in just 7 days, carrying some 100,000 pounds of tobacco. Amazingly, these intrepid pole boaters returned upriver after delivering their goods at the Georgia coast. The 250-mile upstream trip from Darien to Milledgeville could be poled by a crew of 5 in about 30 days, and they didn't return with an empty boat. In 1825, the pole boat Georgia delivered to Milledgeville cargo that included, among other things, 10,000 pounds of iron, 3,500 pounds of steel, 50 barrels of rye whiskey, 10 kegs of tobacco, and 500 bushels of salt. Steamboats began plying the Oconee as early as 1819 and remained a part of river culture for the next century. And throughout this time period, and especially in the latter half of the 19th century, timber rafts were perhaps the most common vessel on the Oconee. Thus, landings like Cooper's dotted the riverbanks from the Altamaha to Milledgeville.